They were following a game trail on the ridge above the valley, heading down towards the hide in the valley below. You were saying earlier that you knew why dinosaurs became extinct. Well, I'm pretty sure I do, Malcom said. The basic situation is simply enough. Dinosaurs arose in the Triassic, about 200 million years ago. They proliferated throughout the Jurassic and the Cretaceous period that followed. They were the dominant life form on this planet for about 150 million years, which is a very long time. Consider we have been here for only 3 million, Eddie said. Let's not put on airs, Malcom said. Some puny apes have been here for 3 million years. We haven't. Recognizable human beings have only been on this planet for 35,000 years. That's how long it's been since our ancestors painted caves in France and Spain, drawing pictures of games to invoke success in the hunt. 35,000 years. In the history of the Earth, that's nothing at all. We have just arrived. Okay. And of course, even 35,000 years ago, we were already making species extinct. Cavemen killed so much game that animals became extinct on several continents. There used to be lions and tigers in Europe. There used to be giraffes and rhinos in Los Angeles. Hell, 10,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Native Americans hunted the woolly mammoth to extinction. This is nothing new, this human tendency, Ian. Well, it's a fact. Although your modern airheads think it's also brand new. Ian, you were talking about dinosaurs. Right, dinosaurs. Anyway, during 150 million years on this planet, dinosaurs were successful. That by the Cretaceous, there were 21 major groups of them. A few groups, like the Camarasaurs and the Frabosaurs, had died out, but the overwhelming majority of dinosaurs groups were still active throughout the Cretaceous. And then suddenly, about 65 million years ago, every single group became extinct, and only the birds remained. So, the question is, what was that? I thought you knew, Thorne said. No, what was that sound? Did you hear something? No, Thorne said. Stop the car, Malcom said. I don't hear anything. What do you think you shh? He cupped his hand to his ear and put his head out the window, listening intently. After a moment, he came back in. I could have sworn I heard an engine. An engine? You mean an internal combustion engine? Right. He pointed to the east. It sounded like it was coming from over there. They listened again and heard nothing. Thorne shook his head. I can't imagine a gas engine here, Ian. There's no gas to run one. Dr. Malcom? Yes, Arby. Who else is here? On the island? What do you mean? Turn on your monitor. Thorne flicked on the dashboard monitor. They saw a view from one of the security cameras. A view locked down into a narrow, stemmed east valley. They saw the slump of a hillside, dark beneath the trees. A tree branch blocked much of the frame, but the view was still, silent. There was no sign of activity. What do you see, Arby? Just watch. Through the leaves, Thorne saw a flash of kiting, then another. He realized it was a person, half walking, half sliding, down the stemmed jungle slump towards the floor below. Small, compact frame, short, dark hair. I'll be damned, Malcom said, smiling. You know who that is? Yes, of course. It's Sarah. Well, we better go get her. Thorne reached for the radio, pressed the button. Richard! Richard, are you eating? Great. He's not answering. Probably decided to go for a walk, pursuing his research. That's what I'm afraid of. Eddie, unhook the motorcycle and go see what Levine's doing now. Take the Listran with you. We'll pick up Sarah. Levine followed the game trail, moving deeper into the darkness of the jungle. The Parasaurs were somewhere up ahead, making a lot of noise as they crashed through the ferns and palms on the jungle floor. At least now he understood why they had formed into a single file. There was no other practical way to move through the dense grove of the rainforest. Their vocalization had never stopped, but Levine noticed they were taking on a different character, more high-pitched, more excited. He hurried forward, pushing past wet palm fronds, taller than he was, following the beating trail. As he listens to the cries of the animals ahead, he also began to notice the distinctive odor, pungent, and a sweat sore. He had the feeling the odor was growing stronger, but But up ahead, something was happening. There was no doubt about it. The parasaur vocalizations were now clipped, almost barking sounds. He sensed in them an agitated quality. But what could agitate an animal 12 feet high and 30 feet long? His curiosity overwhelmed him. Levine began to run through the jungle, shoving aside palms, leaping over fallen trees. In the foliage ahead, he heard a hissing sound, a sort of spattering. And then, one of the parasaurs gave a long, low trumpeting cry. Levine was gone. He looked at the ground around the hide and saw many deep animal footprints in the ground. The prints were large, about 2 feet in diameter, and they seemed to be going off into the jungle behind the hide. He scanned the ground and saw fresh boot marks as well. They had in a solo trade. He recognized them as Levine's. In some places, the boot marks interrupted the edge of the animal's footprints, which meant that they had been made afterward. The boot marks also led into the forest. The last thing he wanted to do was going into the jungle. The very idea gave him the creeps. But what choice was there? He had to get Levine back. That guy was getting to be a real problem. Eddie unshouldered the rifle and set it laterally across the handlebars of the motorcycle. Then he twisted the grips, and silently, the bike moved forward into darkness. Heart pounding with excitement, Levine pushed past the last of the big palms. He stopped abruptly. Directly ahead of him, the tail of the parasaur swung back and forth above his head. The animal's hindquarters were turned towards him, and a thick stream of urine gushed from the posterior pubis, spattering onto the ground below. Levine jumped back, avoiding the stream. Beyond the nearest animal, he saw the clearing in the jungle, trampled flat by the countless animal feet. The parasaurs had located themselves at various positions within this clearing, and they were all urinating together. So there were latrine animals, he thought. That was fascinating and totally unexpected. Many contemporary animals, including rhinos and deers, prefer to relive themselves at particular spots, and many times the behavior of herds was coordinated. Laddering behavior was generally considered to be a method of marking territory, but whatever the reason, no one had ever expected the dinosaurs acting in this way. As Levine watched, the parasaurs finished urinating, and each moved in a few feet to the side. Then they defected, again in unison. Very nice. He turned and saw Eddie Carr sitting on the motorcycle. He was waving his hand in front of his face. Dino farts. Better not light a match around here. You'll blow the place up. Shh! Levine hissed angrily, shaking his head. He turned back to the parasaurs. This was no time to interrupt by a vulgar young fool. Several of the animals bent their heads down and began to lick the puddle of urine. No doubt they wanted to recover lost nutrients. Perhaps salt or hormones. Or perhaps it was something seasonal. The parasaurs trumpeted and headed deeper into the forest. Levine moved forward to follow them. "Dr. Levine," Eddie said quickly. "Get on a bike, now!" Levine ignored him, but as the big animals departed, he saw dozens of tiny green dinosaurs leap cheerily out into the clearing. He realized at once what they were. Parasaurolophus triassicus, small scavengers found in France in 1913 in Bavaria. Levine stared, fascinated. Of course, he knew the animal well, but only from reconstructions, because there was no complete skeleton of Parasaurolophus anywhere in the world. Ostium had done the most complete studies, but he had to work with a skeleton that was badly crushed and fragmentary. The tail, neck, and arms were all missing from the animal Ostium described, yet the Parasaurolophus were fully formed and active, hopping around like so many chickens. As he watched, the compies began to eat the fresh dung and drink what was left of the urine. Levine frowned. Was there part of ordinary scavenger behavior? Levine wasn't sure. He edged forward to look at them very closely. "Dr. Levine!" It was interesting that the compies only eat fresh dung, not the dry remnants that were everywhere in the clearing. Whatever nutrients they had obtained from the dung, it must only be present in the fresh specimens. That suggested a protein or hormones that would degrade over time. Probably he should obtain a fresh sample for analysis. He reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew a plastic baggie. He moved among the compies, which seemed indifferent to his presence. He crouched down by the nearest dung pile and reached slowly forward. "Dr. Levine!" He glanced back at Noice, and in that moment, one of the compies leapt forward and bit his hand. Another jumped into his shoulder and bit his ear. Levine yelled and stood up. The compies hopped into the ground and scampered away. Damn it! That's enough. Get into the damn bike. We're getting out of here. The red Jeep Wrangler came to a stop. Directly ahead, the game trail had been following continued through the foliage to a clearing beyond. The game trail was wide and muddy, trampled flat by large animals. They could see large, deep footprints in the mud. From the clearing, they heard a low honking sound, like the sound of a very large geese. Okay, give me the box. What box? There's a black box on the seat beside you, and a battery pack. Give them to me. Oh, it's heavy. That's because of the cone magnets. It was the size of a shoebox, except in the ending it was a flaring cone. Underneath it was a mount of pistol grip. Dodgson clipped the battery pack to his belt and plugged it into the box. Then he picked up the box up by the pistol grip. There was a knob at the back, facing him, and gradually dial. Batteries charged? They're charged, King said. Okay, Dodgson said. I'll go first into the nest area. I'll adjust the box and get rid of the animals. You two follow behind me, and once the animals are gone, you each take an egg from the nest. Then you leave and bring them back to the car. I'll come back last. Then we'll drive off. Got it? Right, Baselton said. Okay, King said. What kind of dinosaurs are these? I have no fucking idea, Dodgson said, climbing out of the car. And it doesn't make any difference. Just follow the procedure. He closed the door softly. The others got out quietly, and they started forward, down the wet trail. Their feet squeezed into the mud. The sound from the clearing continued. To Dodgson, it sounded like a lot of animals. He pushed aside the last of the ferns and saw them. It was a large nesting site, with perhaps 4 to 5 low earthen mounds, covered in grasses. The mounds were about 7 feet wide and 3 feet deep. There were 20 colored adults around the mounds. A whole herd of dinosaurs surrounding the nesting site, and the adults were big, 30 feet long and 10 feet high, all honking and snorting. Oh my God, Baselton said, staring. Dodgson shook his head. They're Maiasauras, he whispered. This is gonna be a piece of cake. Watching them now, Dodgson could see the Maiasauras were indeed attentive parents. The big adults circled the nest, moving carefully to step outside the shallow earthen moat. The Beijing Maiasauras were duck-billed dinosaurs. They had a large head that ended in a broad, flattering snout, rather like the bill of a duck. They were taking a mouthful of grass and dropping it on the eggs in the mount. This was a way to regulate the temperature of the eggs. If the huge animals sat on the eggs, they would crush them. So instead, they put the layers of grass over the eggs, which traps heat and kept the egg at a more constant temperature. The animals worked steadily. They're huge, Baselton said. They're nothing more but oversized cows, Dodgson said. Although the Maiasauras were large, they were plant eaters, and they had a docile, slight, stupid manner of cows. Ready? Here we go. He lifted the box like a gun and stepped forward into view. Dodgson expected a big reaction when the Maiasauras saw him, but there was none at all. They hardly seemed to notice him. 1 or 2 adults looked over, stared with dumb eyes, and then looked away. The animals continued to drop grass on the eggs, which were pale white oval and nearly 2 feet long, which was about twice the size of an ostrich egg, about the size of a small beach ball. No animals had hatched yet. King and Baselton stepped out and stood beside him in the clearing. Still, the Maiasauras ignored them. Amazing, Baselton said. Fine for us, Dodgson said, and he turned on the box. A continuous, high-pitched shriek filled the clearing. The Maiasauras immediately turned towards the sound, honking and lifting their heads. They seemed agitated, confused. Dodgson twisted a dial, and the shriek became higher, ear-splitting. The Maiasauras bobbled their heads and moved away from this painful sound. They excruciated at the far end of the clearing, several of the animals urinating and alert. A few of them move away from the foliage, abandoning the nest. They were agitated, but they stay away. King stepped into the nearest nest and grunted as he picked up the egg. His arms hardly reached around the huge oval. The Maiasauras honked at him, but none of the adults moved forward. Then Baselton went into the nest, took an egg, and followed King back to the car. Dodgson walked backwards, holding the box on the adults. At the edge of the clearing, he turned the sound off. At once, the Maiasauras came back, honking loudly and repeatedly. But as they returned to the nest, it seems as the adults forgot what had just happened. Within a few moments, they ceased honking and went back to dropping grass over the eggs. They ignored Baselton as he left, headed back along the game trail. Stupid animals, Dodgson thought, as he went to the car. Baselton and King were setting the eggs into a big styrofoam containers in the back, and fitted with the foam packet around them carefully. Both men were grinning like kids. That was amazing! Great! Fantastic! What did I tell you, Dodgson said. Nothing to it. He glanced at his watch. At this rate, we'll finish less than 4 hours. He climbed behind the steering wheel and turned on the engine. Baselton got into the back seat. King got into the passenger seat and took out the map. Next, Dodgson said. I tell you, it's fine, Levine said irritably. Look, it didn't even break the skin. He held out his hand. There was a red semicircle where the compy had pressed his teeth into the skin, but that was all. Yeah, well, your ear is bleeding a little. I don't feel anything. It can't be bad. No, it's not bad, Eddie said, opening the first aid kit. But I better clean it up. I preferred to get on with my observation. The dinosaurs were barely a quarter mile away from him, and he could see them well. In the still midday air, he could hear them breathing. Or at least he could, if this young man would leave him alone. Look, Levine said, I know what I'm doing here. You came in at the end of a very interesting and successful experiment. I actually called the dinosaurs to me by imitating their cry. You did? Eddie said. Yes, I did. That was what led them into the forest in the first place. So I hardly think that I need your assistance. The thing is, you got some of that dino shit on your ear. And there's a couple of little punchers. I'll just clean it off for you. May sting a little. I don't care. I have other... Ow! Don't move. It'll only take a second. It's absolutely unnecessary. If you just stay still, it'll be done. There. Levine saw brown and a faint streak of red. Just as he suspected. The injury was trivial. He reached up and touched his ear. It didn't hurt at all. Levine squinted out at the plane as Eddie packed up the first aid kit. Geez, it's hot up here, Eddie said. Yes, Levine said, shrugging. Sarah Harding arrived, and I think they took her back to the trailer. You want to go back now? I can't imagine why, Levine said. I just thought you might want to say hello or something. My work is here, Levine said. He turned away, raised his binoculars to his eyes. So you don't want to come back? Wouldn't dream of it, Levine said, staring through binoculars. Not in a million years. Not in 65 million years. Kelly Curtis listened to the sound of the shower. She couldn't believe it. She stared at the muddy clothes tossed casually on the bed. Short and khaki short sleeve shirt. Sarah Harding's actual clothes. She couldn't help it. Kelly reached out and touched them. She noticed how the fabrics were worn and frayed. Buttons sewed back on. They didn't match. And there were some reddish streaks near the pocket that she thought must be old bloodstains.
Kelly? Yes? Is there any shampoo? I'll look, Dr. Harding.
The men had all gone into the next compartment, leaving her alone with Sarah while she washed. Kelly searched desperately, opened the drawers, slamming them shut again.
Listen, it's okay if you can't find any. I'm looking. Is there any dishwashing liquid? Yes, Dr. Harding, but give it to me. It's all the same stuff. I don't care. Hey, my name is Sarah. Okay, Dr. Harding. Sarah, okay? Sarah.
Sarah Harding was a regular person, very informal and normal. Entrance. Kelly sat on the seat in the kitchen and waited, swinging her feet in case Dr. Harding, Sarah, needed anything else.
I'm gonna wash that man right out of my hair.
After a few moments, the shower turned off, and her hand reached out and took the towel on the hook. And then she came out, wrapped in the towel. Sarah ran her fingers through her short hair, which seems to be all the attention she gave to her appearance.
That feels better. Boy, this is a plush field trailer. Doc really did a great job. Yes, it's nice. How old are you, Kelly? 13. What is that, 8th grade? 7th grade. Dr. Malcom left some clothes for you. He said he thought they fit. Whose are these? I think they're Eddie's. Might work. What are you going to do when you grow up? I don't know. That's a very good answer. It is?
Kelly's mother was always pushing her to get a part-time job, to decide what she wanted to do with her life.
Nobody smart knows what they want to do until they get into their 20s or 30s. Oh, what do you like to study? Actually, I like math. What's wrong with math? Well, girls aren't good at it. I mean, you know? No, I don't know.
Kelly felt panic. She had been experiencing this warm feeling with Sarah Harding, but now she sensed it was dissolving away, as if she had given the wrong answer to a disapproving teacher. She decided not to say anything. She waited in silence. After a moment, Sarah came out again, wearing Eddie's baggy clothes. She sat down and started putting on her pair of boots. She moved in a very normal, matter-of-fact way.
What did you mean girls aren't good at mathematics? Well, that's what everybody says. Everybody like who? My teachers. Great, your teachers. And the other kids call me a brainer. Stuff like that, you know?
Kelly just blurted out. She couldn't believe that she was saying all this to Sarah Harding, who she hardly knew at all except from articles and pictures. But here she was, telling her all this personal stuff, all the things that upset her.
Well, if they say that, you must be pretty good at math, huh? I guess. That's wonderful, Kelly. But the thing is, boys don't like girls who are too smart. Is that so? Well, that's what everybody says. Like who? Like my mom. Uh-huh, and she probably knows what she's talking about. I don't know. My mom only dates jerks, actually. So she could be wrong. I guess. Well, in my experience, some men like smart women, and some don't. It's like everything else in the world. You know about George Schaller? Sure, he studied pandas. Right, pandas, and before that, snow leopards and lions and gorillas. He's the most important animal researcher in the 20th century. And you know how he works? Before he goes into the field, George reads everything that's ever been written and the animal he's going to study. Popular books, newspaper accounts, scientific papers, everything. Then he goes out and observes the animal for himself. And you know what he usually finds? That nearly everything that's been written or said is wrong. Like the gorilla. George studied mountain gorillas 10 years before Dian Fossey. Ever thought of it? And he found that what was believed about gorillas was exaggerated or misunderstood or just plain fantasy, like the idea that you couldn't take women on gorilla expeditions because the gorilla would rape them. Wrong. Everything just wrong. So Kelly, even at your young age, there's something you might as well learn now. All your life people will tell you things, and most of the time, probably 90% of the time, what they'll tell you will be wrong. It's a fact of life. Human beings are just stuffed full of misinformation, so it's hard to know who to believe. I know how you feel. You do? Sure, my mom used to tell me I never amount to anything. So did some of my professors. Really? Oh yes, as a matter of fact.
No, those idiots! They could ruin everything! Sarah immediately turned and went into the other section. Kelly jumped off the seat and hurried after her. The men were all clustered around the monitor. Everyone was talking at once, and they seemed to be upset. This is terrible. Terrible! Is that a Jeep?
They had a red Jeep.
Then it's Dodgson, Malcom said. Damn! Where's he going? I can guess. Where are they now? Malcom said to Arby. I think they're in the East Valley, near where we found Dr. Levine.
Do you mean there are now other people on the island?
Yes, Richard.
Well, you better go stop them before they mess everything up.
I know. Do you want to come back?
Not without a compelling reason. Inform me if one arises.
Harding stared at the screen, watching the jeep.
That's them, all right. That's your friend Dodgson.
He's not my friend, Malcom said. Let's go. We have to stop these bastards. There's no time to waste. The red Jeep Wrangler rolled softly to a stop. Directly ahead was a wall of dense foliage, but through it they can see sunlight from the clearing beyond. Dodgson sat quietly in the car listening. King turned to him about to speak, but Dodgson held his hand, gesturing for him to be quiet. Then he heard it clearly, a low rumbling growl, almost a purr. It was coming from beyond the foliage ahead. It sounded like the biggest jungle cat he has ever heard. Intimately, he felt a slight vibration, hardly anything, but enough to make the car keys clink against the steering column. As he felt that vibration, it slowly dawned to him. Something very big was walking. Beside him, King was staring forward in astonishment. His mouth hung open. Dodgson glanced back at Baselton. The professor was gripping the seat with white fingers. As he listened to the sound, a shadow moved across the ferns directly ahead. Judging by the shadow, the animal was 20 feet high and 40 feet long. It walked on its hind legs. It had a large body, short neck, and a very big head. A tyrannosaur. Dodgson hesitated, staring at the shadow. His heart was pounding in his chest. He considered going to the next nest, but he was confident that the box would work here too. Let's get this over with. Give me the box. Baselton handed him the box, just as he did before. Charged? Batteries are charged, King said. Okay, he said. Here we go. Exactly the same as before. I'll go first, you two follow, and bring the eggs back to the car. Ready? Ready, Baselton said. King did not answer. He was still staring at the shadow. What kind of dinosaur is that? That's a Tyrannosaurus. Oh, Christ, King said. A Tyrannosaurus, Baselton said. It doesn't matter what it is, Dodgson said irritably. Just follow the plan, like before. Everybody ready? Just a minute, Baselton said. What if it doesn't work? We already know it works. There's a rather curious fact about Tyrannosaur that was recently reported, Baselton said. A paleontologist named Crichton did a study of Tyrannosaur brain cases and concluded that they have the brain not much different from a frog's, although, of course, much bigger. The implication is that their nervous system was adapted to motion only. They can't see you if you stand still. Stationary objects become invisible to them. Are you sure about this? King said. That was the report, and it makes perfect sense. One can't forget that dinosaurs, for all their intimidating size, they're actually rather primitive intellects. It's quite logical that a tyrannosaur would have the mental equipment of a frog. I don't see why we're rushing into this, King said nervously. He stared forward. It's much bigger than the other ones. So what? Dodgson said. You heard what George said. It's just a big frog. Let's get this done. Get out of the fucking car. And don't slam the door. Dodgson was already moving ahead, holding the black box like a gun in his hand. Baselton glanced over at King, who was deadly pale and sweaty. He looked on the verge of collapse. He moved forward slowly. Baselton walked alongside him, making sure he was all right. Up ahead, Dodgson gave a final glance back, waved to Baselton and King to catch up. He glared at both of them, and then he stepped through the foliage into the clearing. Baselton saw the Tyrannosaur. No, there were two. They stood on both sides of the mud mount. Two adults, 20 feet high, on their hind legs, powerful, dark red, with big vicious jaws. Like the Maiasauras, the animal stared at Dodgson for a moment, a dumb stare, as if it was amazed to see an intruder. And then the Tyrannosaurus roared in fury. Dodgson lifted the box and pointed at the animals. Immediately, a continuous high-pitched shriek filled the clearing. The Tyrannosaurs roared in response and lowered their heads, extending their necks forward, snapping their jaws, preparing to attack. "Oh fuck," King said. But Dodgson stayed cool. He twisted the dial. Baselton clapped his hands over his ears. The shriek became higher, louder, ear-splitting and incredible painful. The response was immediate. The Tyrannosaurs stepped back as if they had received a physical blow. They ducked their heads. They blinked their eyes rapidly. The sound seems to be vibrating in the air. They roared again, but weakly now, without conviction. A terrible screaming came from the inside of the mud nest. Dodgson moved forward, pointing the box in the air, directly at the animals. The Tyrannosaurs backed away, looking into the nest, then to Dodgson. They swung their heads back and forth rapidly, as if trying to clear their ears. Dodgson calmly adjusted the dial. The sound went higher. It was now excruciating. Dodgson began to climb the mud mount of the nest. Baselton and King scrambled up, following him. Baselton found himself looking down into the nest with 4 molded white eggs and 2 young babies that looked for all the world like swinging oversized turkeys. Anyway, some kind of gigantic baby birds. The 2 Tyrannosaurs were at the far end of the clearing, held away by the sound. Like the Maiasaurs, they urinated in agitation. They stomped their feet, but they did not come closer. Over the ear-splitting shriek of the box, Dodgson shouted to grab one of the eggs. In a dance, King stumbled into the nest, grabbing the nearest egg. He fumbled it in his shaking hands. The egg flew into the air. He catched it again and lungered back. He stepped on the leg of one of the babies, which screamed in fear and pain. At this, the parents tried to come forward again. Drawn by the infant's cry, King hastily clambered out of the nest, ducking away through the foliage. Baselton watched him go. Dodgson shouted at Baselton to grab another egg. Baselton turned to look at the adult Tyrannosaurs, seeing their agitation and their anger, watching their jaws snap open and close. And he had a sudden feeling, the sound or no sound, these animals will not allow anyone to enter their nest again. "George, now!" "I can't," Baselton said. "You dumb fuck!" Holding the gun high, Dodgson began to climb down into the nest himself. But as he started, he twisted his body, and the battery plugged out of the box. The sound abruptly stopped. The Tyrannosaurs shook their heads a final time and roared. Baselton saw Dodgson go rigidly still, his body frozen. Baselton also stood still. Somehow he forced his body to stay where he was. He forced his knees to stop trembling. He held his breath, and he waited. On the far side of the clearing, the Tyrannosaurs began to move towards him. "What are they doing?" Arby cried in the trailer. He was so close to the monitor, his nose almost touching the screen. "Are they crazy? They're just standing there!" Beside him, Kelly said nothing. She watched the screen silently. "Wanna be out there now, Kel?"
Shut up.
No, they're not crazy.
The explorer launched down the trail, heading to the eastern sector of the island. Thorne was driving. Sarah and Malcom were in the back seat.
He should be trying to put his sound machine together again. Are they really just going to stand there?
"Yes," Malcom said.
Why?
"They are misinformed." Dodgson watched the lead Tyrannosaur come towards him. For such big animals, they were cautious. Only one of the 2 parents approached them, and although it paused to roar fiercely every few paces, it seems oddly tentative, as if it was perplexed by the fact that the men were staying there. Or perhaps they could not see them. Perhaps he and Baselton had vanished from their view. The other parent hung back, remaining towards the other side of the nest, bobbing and ducking its head, agitated, but not attacking. Of course, the roar of the approaching dinosaurs were terrifying, blood-chilling. Dodgson didn't dare glance at Baselton, just a few yards away. If he ran, he was a dead man. If he stayed perfectly still, everything would be alright. Standing stiffly, keeping his body rigid, Dodgson held the box at his waist level in his left hand, near his belt buckle. With his right hand, he slowly, very slowly, pulled up the disconnected power cord. He felt the ground shaking beneath his feet. He heard the cries of the infant that King had stepped on. Those screams seemed to be bothering the parents, to arouse them. No matter, just a few seconds more, he would have the plug back into the power pack. The Tyrannosaurs were very close now. Dodgson could smell the rotten odor of the carnivore. The animals roared, and he felt the hot breath. They were staring right at Baselton. Dodgson turned his head to watch. Baselton stood entirely still.
The Tyrannosaur came closer and lowered his big head and snorted at Baselton. He raised his head again, as if it was perplexed. The Tyrannosaurus bellowed, a furious sound. Somehow Baselton stayed unmoving. The Tyrannosaurus bent over, bringing his huge head down again. The jaws opened and closed. Baselton stared straight forward, not blinking. With the huge flaring nostrils, the Tyrannosaurus smelled him a long snuff of inhalation that fluttered Baselton's trousers legs. Then the Tyrannosaur nudged Baselton tentatively with his snout. And at that moment, Dodgson realized that the animal could see him after all. And then the Tyrannosaur swung his head laterally, striking Baselton into the side, and easily knocked him into the earth. Baselton yelled as the Tyrannosaur's big foot came down, pinging him into the ground. Baselton raised his hand and shouted, "You son of a bitch!" Just as the head came down, jaws widened and closed onto him. The movement was gentle, almost delicate. But in the next instant, the head snapped high, tearing the body. Dodgson heard a scream and saw something small and flopping and hanging around the jaw, and realized it was Baselton's arm. Baselton's hand swung freely, the metal band of his wristwatch glittering beneath the Tyrannosaur's huge eyes. Baselton was screaming, a continuous, indifferent sound, and hearing it, Dodgson broke into a dizzy sweat. Then he turned and ran, back towards the car, back towards safety, back towards everything.
Turn it off. Thank you.
I didn't do anything, Arby said. She glanced back at the screen and quickly looked away again. The Tyrannosaur was tearing at something red. She shivered. It was silent in the trailer. Kelly heard the thick electronic corridors and the thumping of the water pumps under the floor. Outside, there was a faint sound of wind rustling the tall grass. Kelly suddenly felt very alone, very isolated on this island.
Arby, what are we going to do?
Dodgson sprinted for the Jeep. The battery pack fell off his belt as he ran, but he didn't care. Up ahead in the Jeep, he saw King waiting tense and pale. Dodgson got into the wheel and started the engine. "Where's Baselton?" King asked. "Didn't make it," Dodgson said. "What do you mean?" "I mean he didn't fucking make it," Dodgson yelled, and slammed the car into gear. The Jeep took off, bouncing up the hill. They heard the Tyrannosaurus bellowing behind them. King was holding the egg, looking back down the road. "Maybe we should get rid of this," he said. "Don't you fucking dare," Dodgson said. King was rolling down the window. "Maybe he just wants the egg back." "No," Dodgson said. "No!" He reached across the passenger seat, struggling with King as he drove. Suddenly, one of the Tyrannosaurs burst from the tree in the road ahead. The animal stood there, snarling, blocking the road. "Oh Christ," Dodgson said, slamming on the brakes. The car slid sinking into the mud tracks, came to a stop. The Tyrannosaur lumbered towards them, bellowing. "Turn around!" King screamed. "Turn around!" But Dodgson didn't turn around. He slammed the car into reverse and started backing down the trail. He was driving fast and the road was narrow. "You're crazy," King said. "You're going to get us killed!" "Shut the fuck up," he shouted. It took all his attention to maneuver the car back down to the widening trail. Even going as fast as he could, he was sure the Tyrannosaur would be faster. It wasn't going to work. They were in a fucking Jeep with a fucking crop top and they were going to get killed and... Behind them, Dodgson saw the second Tyrannosaur charging up the road towards them. He looked forward, saw the first Tyrannosaur peering down on them. They were trapped. He twisted the wheel in panic, and then the car ran off the road, crashing backward into the dense underbush and surrounding tree, and he felt the jolting impact. Then the rear of the car dropped sinking. He realized the back wheels were hanging over the edge of the cliff. He gunned the engine frantically, but the wheels just spun in the air. It was hopeless, and slowly the car sank backward, deeper into the foliage so dense that he couldn't see through it. But they were over the edge. Beside him, King was sobbing. He heard the Tyrannosaurs roaring, very near now. Dodgson flung the door open and jumped out into space. He plunged through the foliage, fell, hit a tree trunk, and tumbled down a steep jungle hill. Somewhere along the way, he felt a sharp pain in his forehead and saw stars for a brief moment before blackness enveloped him, and he lost consciousness. They sat in the Explorer, on top of the ridge overlooking the jungle-covered East Valley. The windows were down. They listened to the bellowing of the Tyrannosaurs as the huge animals crashed through the underbush. They both left the nest. Yeah, Those guys must have taken something, Malcom signed. They heard a sound buzzing, and then Eddie pulled up alongside them in the motorcycle. I thought you might need help. Are you going to go down? Malcom shook his head. No, absolutely not. It's too dangerous. We don't know where they are.
Why did Dodgson just stand there like that? That's not the way to act around predators. You get caught around lions, you make a lot of noise. Wave your hands. Throw things at them. Try to scare them off. You don't just stand there.
He probably read the wrong research paper, Malcom said, shaking his head. There's been a theory going around that Tyrannosaurus can only see movement. A guy named Roxton made case of Rex brain cases and concluded that Tyrannosaurus had the brain of a frog.
Roxton is an idiot. He doesn't know enough anatomies to have sex with his wife. His papers was a joke.
What paper?
Roxton believed that Tyrannosaurs have visual system like an amphibian. A frog can see motion, but doesn't see stillness. But it is quite impossible that predators such as Tyrannosaurs would have visual systems that work that way. Quite impossible, because most common defense of prey animals is to freeze. A deer or something like that senses danger, and it freezes. A predator has to be able to see them anyway, and of course Tyrannosaurs could. It's just like the other idiotic theory put forth by Grant a few years back that a Tyrannosaur could be confused by a driven rainstorm because it was not adapted to wet climates. That's equally absurd. The Cretaceous wasn't particularly dry, and in any case, Tyrannosaurs are North American animals. They have only been found in the US and Canada. Tyrannosaurs live on the shores of the Great Inland Sea, east of the Rocky Mountains. There are lots of thunderstorms on mountain slumps. I'm quite sure Tyrannosaurs saw plenty of rain, and they evolved to deal with it.
So is there any reason why a Tyrannosaur might not attack somebody? Malcom said.
Yes, of course. The most obvious one.
Which is?
If it wasn't hungry. If it had just eaten another animal. Anything larger than a goat would take care of its hunger for hours to come. No. The Tyrannosaurus sees fine, moving or still.
They listened to the roaring coming up from the valley below. They saw a thrashing in the underbrush, about half a mile away to the north. The two Rexes seemed to be answering each other.
What are we carrying?
3 lint strands, fully loaded.
Okay, let's go.
I'm not there, but I have certainly advised waiting.
The hell with the waiting. Sarah's right. Let's go down there and see how bad is it.
Your funeral.
Arby came back to the monitor, wiping his chin. He still looked a little green. Where are they going now?
Dr. Malcom and the others are going to the nest.
Are you kidding?
Don't worry, Sarah can handle it.
You hope. Just beyond the clearing, they parked the Explorer. Eddie pulled up in the motorcycle and leaned it against the trunk of a tree and waited while the others climbed out of the Explorer. Sarah Harding smelled the familiar sour odor of rotten flesh and excrements that always marked a carnivore nesting site. In the afternoon heat, it was faintly nauseating. Flies buzzed in the still air. Harding took one of the rifles and slung it over her shoulder. She looked at the 3 men. They were all standing there very still, tense, not moving. Malcolm's face was pale, particularly around the lips.
If you've got any qualms about this, don't go. Just wait here. I don't want to worry about you. I can do this myself.
Are you sure?
Yes. Now keep quiet.
She moved directly towards the clearing. Malcom and the others hurried to catch up with her. She pushed aside the palm fronds and stepped out into the open. The Tyrannosaurs were gone, and the mud cone was deserted. Over to the right, she saw a shoe with a bit of torn flesh sticking out above the ragged sock. That was all there was left of Baselton. From within the nest, she heard a plaintive, high-pitched squeal. Harding climbed up to the mud bank, with Malcom struggling to follow. She saw 2 infant Tyrannosaurs there, mewling. Nearby, there were 3 large eggs. They saw heavy footprints all around in the mud. They took one of the eggs, Malcom said. Damn,
You didn't want anything to disturb your little ecosystem?
Yeah, I was hoping.
Too bad.
She bent over, looking at the baby Tyrannosaurs. One of the babies was cowering, its downing neck pulled into its body. But the second one behaved very differently. It did not move as they approached, but it remained lying sprawled on its side, breathing shallowly, eyes glazed.
This one's been hurt.
Levine was standing in the hide. He pressed his headset to his ear and spoke into the microphone near his cheek. I need a description.
There's 2 of them, roughly 2 feet long, weighing maybe 40 pounds. About the size of a small cassowary bird. Large eyes, short snout, pale brown color. And there's a ring down around its neck.
Can they stand?
If they can, not very well. They're kind of flopping around, squeaking a lot.
Then they're infants. Probably only a few days old. Never been out of the nest. I'd be very careful.
Why is that?
With offspring that young, the parents won't leave them for long. Hardy moved closer to the injured infant. Still mewling, the baby tried to crawl towards her, dragging its body awkwardly. One leg was bent at an odd angle.
I think the left leg's hurt.
Eddie came closer, standing alongside her to see. Is it broken?
Yeah, probably, but...
Hey! Hey! Let go! Jeez!
Aggressive little guy, isn't he? Right from birth.
Eddie looked down at the tiny razor-sharp jaws. They haven't penetrated the leather. The baby held on firmly. With the butt of the rifle, he poked the infant's head a couple of times. It had no effect at all. The baby lay on the ground, breathing shallowly. Its big eyes blinked slowly as they stared up at Eddie, but it did not release its grip. Let's get out of here, Malcom said. We have seen what we came here to see. We got to find where Dodgson went. I think I saw a track up the trail. They might have gone off there.
We better have a look.
Wait a minute. What am I going to do about the baby? Shoot it. You mean kill it?
It's got a broken leg, Eddie. It's going to die anyway.
Yeah, but we're going up the trail, Eddie. And if we don't find Dodgson, we'll take the ridge road going towards the laboratory. Then down to the trailers again. Okay, Doc. I'm right behind you.
Do it now, because you don't want to be here when Mama and Papa get back.
Driving up the trail, Malcom stared at the dashboard monitor as the image flicked from one camera view to another. He was looking for Dodgson and the rest of his party.
How bad was it?
They took one egg, and we had to shoot one of the babies.
So a loss of 2. Out of a total hatching bruise of what? 6?
That's right.
Frankly, I'd say it's a minor matter. As long as you stop those people from doing anything more.
We're looking for them now, Malcom said, morosely.
It was bound to happen, Ian. You know, you can't expect to observe the animals without changing anything. It's a scientific impossible.
Of course it is, Malcom said. That's the greatest single scientific discovery of the 20th century. You can't study anything without changing it.
Since Galileo, scientists had adopted the view that they were objective observers of the natural world. That was implicit in every aspect of their behavior, even the way they wrote scientific papers, saying things like, "It was observed," as if nobody had observed it. For 300 years, that impersonal quality was the hallmark of science. Science was objective, and the observer had no influence on the results he or she described. This objectivity made science different from the humanities or from religion, fields where the observer's point of view was integral, where the observer was inextricably mixed up in the results observed. But in the 20th century, that difference had vanished. Scientific objectivity was gone, even at the most fundamental levels. Physicists now knew you couldn't even measure a single subatomic particle without affecting it totally. If you stuck your instruments in to measure a particle's position, you changed its velocity. If you measured its velocity, you changed its position. That basic truth became the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, that whatever you studied, you also changed. In the end, it became clear that all scientists were participants in a participatory universe which did not allow anyone to be a mere observer.
I know subjectivity is impossible, Malcom said impatiently. I'm not concerned about that. Then what are you concerned about? I'm concerned about Gambler's Ruin, Malcom said, staring at the monitor. Gambler's Ruin was a notorious and much debated statistical phenomenon that had major consequences both for evolution and for everyday life. Let's say you're a gambler, and you're playing a coin toss game. Every time a coin comes up heads, you win $1. Every time it comes a tail, you lose $1. Okay. What happens over time?
The chances of getting either heads or tails is even, so maybe you win, maybe you lose, but in the end, you'll come out at 0.
Unfortunately, you don't, Malcom said. If you gamble long enough, you'll always lose. The gambler is always ruined. That's why casinos stay in business. But the question is, what happens over time? What happens in the period before the gambler is finally ruined?
Okay, what happens?
If you chart the gambler's fortune over time, what you find is the gambler wins for a period, or loses for a period. In other words, everything in the world goes in streaks. It's a real phenomenon, and you see it everywhere. In weather, in river flooding, in baseball, in heart rhythms, in stock markets. Once things go bad, they intend to stay bad. Like the old folks saying that bad things come in threes. Complicity theory tells us the folk wisdom is right. Bad things clustered. Things go to hell together. That's the real world. So what are you saying? That things are going to hell now? They will be thanks to Dodgson, Malcom said, frowning at the monitor. What happened to those bastards anyway? There was a buzzing like the sound of a distant bee. Howard King was dimly aware of it as he came slowly back to consciousness. He opened his eyes and saw the windshield of the car and the branches of trees beyond. The buzzing was louder. King didn't know where he was. He couldn't remember how he got here, what had happened. He felt pain in his shoulders and at his hips. His forehead throbbed. He tried to remember, but the pain distracted him, preventing him from thinking clearly. The last thing he remembered was the tyrannosaur in front of him on the road. That was the last thing. King turned his head and cried out at sudden. Sharp pain ran up his neck to his skull. The pain made him gasp, took his breath away. He closed his eyes, wincing. Then he slowly opened them again. Dodgson was not in the car. The driver's door hung wide open, the dimpling shadow across the door panel. The keys were still in the ignition. Dodgson was gone. There was a streak of blood across the top of the steering wheel. The black box was on the floor by the gear shift. In the distance, King heard the buzzing again, like a giant bee. It was a mechanical sound, he now realized. Something mechanical. He made him think of the boat. How long would the boat wait at the river? What time was it anyway? He looked at his watch. The crystal was smashed. The hands fixed it at 1:54. He heard the buzzing again. It was coming closer. With an effort, King pushed himself away from the seat, towards the dashboard. The streak of electrical pain shoot up his spine, but quickly subside. He took a deep breath. I'm alright. At least I'm still here. King looked at the open driver's door in the sunlight. The sun was still high.
It must still be sometime in the afternoon. When was the boat leaving? 4 o'clock? 5 o'clock? He couldn't remember anymore, but he was certain that those Spanish fishermen wouldn't hang out around once it starts to get dark. They had left the island, and Howard King wanted to be on the boat when they did. It was the only thing he wanted in the world. Wincing, he raised himself up and painfully slid over to the driver's seat. He settled himself in and took a deep breath, and then leaned over and looked out the open door. The car was hanging over empty space supported by trees. He saw the steam jungle hillside falling away beneath him. It was dark beneath the canopy of trees. He felt dizzy just looking down. The ground must be 20 or 30 feet below him. He saw scattered green ferns and a few dark boulders. He twisted his body to look more. And then he saw him. Dodgson lying on his back, head downward on the slump of the hill. His body was crumbled, arms and legs thrown out in awkward position. He was not moving. King couldn't see him very well in the dense foliage on the hillside, but Dodgson looked dead. A car! And then the car was gone. From the sound of it, it was an electrical car. So it must be Malcom. Howard King was somehow encouraged by the thought that other people were in this island. He felt new strength. Despite the pain in his body, he reached forward and turned the key into the ignition. The engine rumbled. He put the car in gear and gently stepped on the accelerator. He remembered this road now. To the right, it led down to the Tyrannosaurus Nest. Malcolm's car had gone to the left. King turned left and headed up the road. He was trying to remember how to get back to the river, back to the boat. He vaguely recalled that there was a wide fork in the road at the top of the hill. He would take that fork. He decided, drive down the hill and get the hell off this island. That was his only goal, to get off this island before it was too late.
The explorer came to the top of the hill, and Thorne drove into the ridge road. The road curved back and forth, cut into the rock face of the cliff. In many places, the drop-off was precipitous, but they had views over the entire island. Eventually, they came to a place where they could look over the valley. They could see the hide off to the left, and close by, the clearings with the 2 trailers. Off to the right was the laboratory complex, and the worker complex beyond. "I don't see Dodgson anywhere," Malcom said unhappily. "Where could he have gone?" Thorne pushed the radio button. "Arby?
Yes, Doc.
Do you see them?"
No, but
"What?
don't you want to come back here now? It's pretty amazing.
What is it?" Thorne said.
Eddie, he just got back, and he brought the baby with him.
"He did what?"